Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Renu Tyagi from Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. Today I am going to speak on the module Shifting Cultivation from the paper Ecological Anthropology, Cultural and Biological Dimensions. The learning objective of this module include number 1 to understand the concept of shifting cultivation, number 2 to equip the students with certain theoretical aspect of the shifting cultivation, and number 3 to highlight about the shifting cultivation practices in China and India with reference to Northeast India, and then at the last to explain the changing nature of shifting cultivation. Now let us understand what is shifting cultivation. It is widely accepted that shifting cultivation is an agricultural system characterized by a rotation of fields rather than of the crops. Shifting cultivation is a way of discontinuous cropping in which periods of fallowing are typically longer than the periods of cropping. Shifting cultivation typically has a way of clearing the field, generally termed as the swedan, through the use of slash and burn techniques. Shifting cultivation is known by the variety of terms including field forest rotation, slash and burn and swedening. Figure 1 displays the evolution of agricultural practices. It is reported that shifting cultivation is widespread throughout the humid tropics, but was also practiced in temperate Europe until the 19th century and sometimes later. It is estimated that there are over 250 million shifting cultivators worldwide, with 100 million in the Southeast Asia alone. Shifting cultivation is enormously heterogeneous and subtypes can be distinguished according to the crop raised, crop associations, crop successions, fallow length, climatic and soil conditions, field technologies and treatment, and the community mobility of the settlement. It is understood that in all shifting cultivation systems, the burning of the cleared vegetation is critical to the release of the nutrients which ensures field productivity. Shifting cultivation is the practice of bringing into agriculture previously uncultivated land for several seasons, followed by the abandonment as part of the human nomadic culture. It is increasingly recognized that the traditional shifting cultivation practiced by traditional and indigenous communities, particularly in the tropics, represent a sustainable form of agriculture that is well adapted in natural and semi-natural ecosystems, most notably in the rainforest. Far from providing an inefficient or wasteful form of the agriculture, as was once thought, shifting cultivation is now regarded by many scientists and grassroots environmentalists as the least harmful to the environment and to the wildlife diversity. Operationally, shifting cultivation can be defined as a system of agriculture under which plots of land were cultivated for a limited period without the application of manure until crop yield declined. The land was then abandoned and left in revert to forest, with new plots being cleared. This is believed to have been one of the main form of agriculture in Neolithic Europe and was characteristics of the marginal forest areas into medieval times. It survived in North Scandinavia into the early 20th century and is still used in the tropics, though on a much smaller scale than formerly. Shifting cultivation is known as ladang in Malaysia and Indonesia, milpa in Central America, chitanmin in parts of Africa, zoom or kumri in India, and chenna in Sri Lanka. Rath in 2015 defined shifting cultivation as any continuing agricultural system in which impermanent clearing are cropped for shorter periods in year than they are allowed to remain fallow. It is also defined as an agricultural system which is characterized by slash and burn and by a short period of cropping alternating with the long fallow periods. It is an agricultural system which is characterized by a rotation of field rather than a crop by a short period of the cropping, alternating with the long fallow period of cropping and clearing by means of slash and burn. It is also a labor intensive and land extensive process of cultivation. Its origin is traced to as far back as the Neolithic period between the year 1300 to 3000 BC. It occupies a distinct place in the tribal economy and constitutes a vital part of the lifestyle and socio-economic setup of hill and tribal regions. This form of cultivation is regarded as a distinct stage in the evolution of agriculture. It is understood that shifting cultivation is the most primarily among all types of agriculture. The variety of the soil, climate and vegetation is responsible for many types of agriculture in the world. The development of agriculture has passed through two distinct lines, that is plains cultivation and hill cultivation. Shifting cultivation falls in the later category. This type of cultivation has been considered to be the most ancient, dating back to the Neolithic period between the year 1300 to 3000 BC. It is a distinctive type of agriculture practiced at a primitive level of the operation under certain environmental constraints. According to Elwin, shifting cultivation is a stage in the evolution of human culture, and almost all the races have resorted this practice in some stage or the other. Shifting cultivation occupies a distinct place in the tribal economy. It constitutes a vital part of the socio-economic network of the tribal life, particularly the hill tribal economy, which is regarded as the principal source of livelihood. Shifting cultivation is an ancient system of agriculture in which a patch of hill is cleared through the fire and is cropped through rotation. Therefore, this technique is also known as the field forest rotation or slash and burn agriculture, as it always involves the impermanent agriculture use of the plots produced by cutting, hacks and burning of the vegetation cover. Shifting cultivation is a process which consists of cutting of trees on top and slope of the hills, burning the fallen trees and bushes and dibbling or broadcasting the seeds in the ash covered soil. Good crops are harvested for the first 2 or 3 years at a diminishing rate, and then the land is abandoned, leaving only bald hills devoid of any economic or ecological importance. Then a new clearing is opened for fresh cultivation. The cultivation is thus shifted from one patch of land to another, abandoning one after another, bringing large scale devastation of soil fertility and vegetation. Figure 2 shows the slash and burn cultivation or zoom cultivation. In the hill slopes, for the practice of shifting cultivation using slash and burn method is a typical of aboriginals. They periodically cut down the forest areas and burn them in order to clear an area for the planting. The ash thus collected is spread on the entire patch of land, which works as manure. Afterwards, the seeds are dripped in the soil. On this land, crops are raised for 1 to 3 years, and after the fertility of the soil diminishes, the soil is unable to support any crop further. The field is abandoned to get recovered naturally. Naturally, the cultivation is shifted to another land and the cultivator returns to the original plot after the soil regains its fertility. Now, let us see how geographic location affects. Shifting cultivation takes on its most characteristic form in regions which have one or more seasons of copious or enough rain, alternating with the shorter periods when little or no rainfall. In such places, relative humidity remains high throughout the dry season. In such climate, the natural vegetation is rainforest. The shifting cultivation extends beyond the limits of the rain forest across a marginal zone covered with the similar vegetation. This cultivation is practiced with variation throughout the tropical and subtropical regions of the world. It is also practiced by the prehistoric men. The primitive community of 63 countries in Africa, Asia, South America and Central America follow this practice of agriculture. Shifting cultivation is practiced by a number of tribes in the world. The Yoruba of Congo Basin, the Bemba of Northern Rhodesia, Yao of Southern Nyasaland, Malaysian of Solomon Island, Boro of the Western Amazon forest, Bakeri Indians of the Upper Ninju region in South America, Hill tribes of the North Borneo and Veda of Ceylon are few examples of the tribe who are still practicing the shifting cultivation mode of farming. Shifting cultivation and its changes in China can also be understood. In 1980, shifting cultivation in China became the subject of debate among the scholars from national and international level, along with the question such as what shifting cultivation really was and whether or not it has destroyed the forest. During 1970s and 1980s, there was serious rainforest destruction in Asia, Africa and South America for the greed of timber shown by the enterprises based in developed countries. While forest destruction became a global environmental issue, the indigenous people who lived in this forest and their shifting cultivation has become a subject of close attention by the scholars around the world. Shifting cultivation has a very long history in China. With the loss of the forest area, the practice of shifting cultivation diminished. With the end of the Cultural Revolution in mid-1970s, international ideas became popular and the people began to pay more and more attention to the environmental problem. However, the ethnic minorities living in the southwest of the Yunnan province continued the practice of shifting cultivation and they are blamed for destructing the forest. Now, let us understand the theoretical background behind this cultivation. The first one is the Marxist ethnic theory. This theory was followed and practiced well in China with the motive of the social development which can be found in relationship between productive forces and society's need for the production. The history of the social development reflects 5 kinds of the social evolution, among them affecting shifting cultivation. According to them, shifting cultivation refers to the productive forces of primitive society, so there is compulsion for the change which the superior societies must have transformed or replaced. This gives rise to a number of questions. Why do the productive forces of a primitive society continue to exist without change? Or why do ethnic minorities living in a mountain area still choose shifting cultivation for their livelihood? Or is it appropriate for most of the natural scientists and anthropologists to prove that shifting cultivation is backward and primitive but neglect the point of view of indigenous people? Agricultural evolution theory says that there are 3 distinct periods in the evolution of the agriculture. Beginning with the primitive shifting cultivation, moving to the hoe farming and to cultivating the soil with the plough. Therefore, in the mountain area of the southwestern Yunnan province, we can find living fossils where indigenous people still practice shifting cultivation. In primitive society, people would have used knives and axes and other tools made up of the stones for shifting cultivation. Today, even indigenous people not only use the iron and steel knives, but they also use hoes and plough made from the iron and steel for farming. The evolution of agriculture is presented in figure 3. Now, let us come to the third theory, that is economic cultural theory. This theory refers to the synthesis created by people who lives in the same physical condition and at a similar level of social development. It is difficult to fix the boundaries between different economic cultural typologies referred to the synthesis created by people who live in the same physical condition and at a similar level of social development. The question then arises, is the type of shifting cultivation determined by environment or physical conditions? Now let us understand the cultural ecology and ecological anthropology. In traditional societies, the focus was mainly on the livelihood of the people and their adaptation to their living environment. The ability of the human being to adopt is an effective means of defining the relationship between people living in a small scale society and their natural environment. The disadvantages of this ecological adaptation rule is that it cannot measure the characteristics of a society that is or has been strongly impacted by the decision of the country's government or by the demands of fluctuation of the market. Now let us see the causes of changes of shifting cultivation. The ideology of the state shifting cultivation is regarded as the productive force of a primitive society. In China, people use advanced productive forces to replace the primitive ones, which is the only one direction beyond the primitive society towards a socialist society. Now let us understand the government policies. To change and replace the shifting cultivation, the central government has implemented a number of policies, law and regulations to forward the shifting cultivation. Now let us see the role of social reforms. The implementation of a socialist transformation by using its administrative system to replace traditional social organization and cultural system resulted in traditional production and living system to lost their balance. Population growth is another factor. The population of the ethnic minorities living in the mountainous areas of Yunnan province has tripled over the past 60 years. With the increase in the number of individuals, the relationship between the population and the use of land has become uneasy. So, it is difficult for minority groups to continue shifting cultivation. Now, let us see the role of market economy. Along with other reforms and policies, the central government of China is paying close attention to the developing market economy. In order to pursue the economic interest, most ethnic minorities groups started planting rubber and other cash trees such as the tea and various fruits. As a result, shifting cultivation is disappearing quickly. Shifting cultivation in India need to be understood. Shifting cultivation is commonly known as the zoom cultivation in India. The practice is similar to the form of shifting cultivation like other countries from the different corners of the world. It occupies a distinct place in the tribal economy of India. Many studies in shifting cultivation in India have been conducted by different institutions and researchers. In India, shifting cultivation is largely found in the states of Andhra Pradesh, the hill district of the Assam, Arunachal Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland, Odisha and Tripura. Now let us understand the basic concept of the shifting cultivation. According to Rath in 2015, who classified the basic features of the shifting cultivation, number 1, it is a system of cultivation which is practiced mainly by the simpler cultures and small populations, but occasionally used by almost anyone for whom the cropping systems appears expedient. Number 2, human labor is the chief input and a few simple hand tools are used in this cultivation. Number 3, it is a labor pattern which matters. Labor patterns frequently cooperative in this type of cultivation, but involving many variations in working group structures. Number 4, clearing of the field primarily by the felling, cutting, slashing and burning and using fire to dispose of the vegetative debris after drying. Frequent shifting of the cropped field, normally in some kind of sequence in land control, resting in special social groups under customary law but sometimes occurring under other legal institution of land control. Many different systems in crop planting in given fields, but both multiple cropping and specialized cropping. Use of the crops primarily for the subsistence, but exchange patterns may reach total sale of whole product. The next characteristic feature is that field per acre and per hour of the man is normally comparable with those of permanent field agriculture within region in which comparison is properly made, but yields are often below those of the mechanically powered permanent field agriculture. The next feature is that the use of vegetable cover as soil conditioner and source of plant nutrient for cropping cycle. When the system is efficiently operated, soil erosion is not greater than soil erosion under other systems that are being efficiently operated. The details of the practice vary depending upon the physical environment and cultural milieu. There is a destruction of natural resources only when operated inefficiently and not more inherently destructive than other system of agriculture. It is a residual system of agriculture largely replaced by other system except when retention of practice is expedient. The transfer of the residence common but not universal with the many patterns of residence according to the evolutionary level or detailed system employed and preference of the culture group. It is operated chiefly in the region where more technologically advanced system of agriculture have not become economically or culturally possible, or in the region where the land has not yet been appropriated by people with greater political or cultural power. Figure 4 displays the characteristics of the shifting cultivation. In India, the practice of shifting cultivation is not an abnormal one, as it is in the main mean for the survival of the indigenous tribal groups. Rath mentioned that the primitive method is the only negative factor and it is the further differentiated as absolute, induced and accused. Now, what is absolute? Under the category, the tribes carry on the practice as an age-old tradition. The tribe like the Bonda, Didya, Sora and Kandha are practicing shifting cultivation as an age-old tradition. The second category is induced one. The outside unscrupulous money lenders volunteer to lend money to the tribals and induce them to earn on with an understanding to take a share of the produce as interest. The outstanding capital remains as heavy burden on the tribal and also ultimately engage the tribal as bonded laborers. The third category is the accused one. Under this category, some of the anti-social elements exercise their unauthored influence to lure the Adivasis with a false hope to record the land in the name of the cultivators, but ultimately the cultivator is being accused as an offender. Now, let us see the impact or effects of the shifting cultivation. Economic and social impact of the shifting cultivations are viewed differently by different groups. As shifting cultivation damages forest, this practice is ruinous and wasteful, dries up the spring in the hills which cause soil erosion, destroys valuable forest, affect rainfall and deprive the people with the benefits of the forest and forest produce. Shifting cultivation upsets the accumulated national resources by removing more from it than it can produce. The evil effect of the shifting cultivation have been summed up by Harris from the Agency Commission of the Madras. According to him, it causes spring below the hills to dry up. It causes the soil below the land to be washed away. It ruins the valuable timber for the sake of much less valuable crops of gain. It causes the hot weather supplies in these rivers to diminish and thus reduce the water available for second crop cultivation. According to him, the cultivation causes very heavy floods in the river and endangers the life and property. It also brings down the heavy silt in the tanks and makes them useless to the fields and destroys the crops. Thus, the main effect of the shifting cultivation are deforestation, soil erosion, diminished rainfall, sitting up of the river channel, stream bed and reservoirs, and deterioration of the climate of our region. It creates a bad impact on the forest ecosystem, as the forest ecosystem consists of major components like atmospheric climate, soil and its living organism. As the living organisms, plants and animals maintain a balance between carbon dioxide and oxygen in the atmosphere, this balance is disturbed as the tribe set fire to the forest for clearing the ground for the purpose of cultivation, which results in increasing of the quantity of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Besides, it also generates poisonous gases in the region by large scale destruction of the plant and trees. Shifting cultivation has not been taken into consideration those problems like the soil erosion, deforestation and consequent ecological imbalances. Low productivity, absence of agricultural surplus, primitive techniques of production and hence non-industrialization were the inevitable results of the shifting cultivation according to Majumdar. Shifting cultivation or zoom cultivation in Nagaland, Northeast India is the traditional agricultural system which is practiced by the people of Nagaland. It is believed that due to this practice, the forest areas are destructed, which creates the problem of erosion of the topsoil. Many research studies are conducted in Nagaland in order to adapt to the better agricultural practices to prevent the climatic change. One of the misconceptions about zoom cultivation is that it converts the primary forest to the agricultural land. It cumulatively reduces the forest cover and its environmental threat extend as far as the loss of biodiversity. In reality, zoom farmers use and reuse the same area of the land when a cropping period ends. The particular plot is abandoned and farmer move to another plot that has been used before. But it has to be fallowed for long enough to have rejuvenated the soil nutrients under secondary forest. Studies were conducted in the year from 2002 to 2007 set out to determine how zooming was affecting Nagaland forest cover. The result of the studies in the villages where the research was conducted and was that in some villages the primary forest which are converted for agricultural use occurred around 100 years ago or even longer. Since then, their primary forests have remained intact. In some villages, the most recent conversion of the primary forest for zoom cropping occurred between 41 and 50 years ago, whereas in some villages, the primary forest for zoom cropping occurred as recently as 11 to 20 years ago. However, in the villages where the research has been conducted, it recorded the conversion of the primary forest which occurred only as an extension of the land already within the existing zoom rotational cycle. The survey conducted in many villages showed that the area under zoom had been decreasing. This survey conducted by the Nagaland Empowerment of People Through Economic Development, that is NEPED project, which covered 119 villages in 10 of the Nagaland's 11 districts, excluding the Dimapur. In 75 out of the 119 villages, that is 67% of the total zoom area, was decreasing in 12 villages, that is 12%. It showed an increase in 32 villages and it remained same in some. The decrease of the zoom results in the people to adopt available alternative sources of livelihood such as off-farm activities, for example, pig rearing, machinery, wage labor and so on. Salaried jobs, private or public, and private enterprises, that is shopkeeping, trading, contract work and rural-urban migration. The northern district of the Mon, Longlang, Sunsang and Kefire, where increase in the area of the zoom was observed, could be linked to the lower literacy rate. The large-scale practice of zoom cultivation in these areas could also be due to the rules enforced by the village authorities under customary law. Therefore, it may be safely assumed that any decrease in the forest area in Nagaland is being compensated by an increase in the underfallow regrowth, which eventually leads to the permanent secondary forest. Perhaps the area of the land reverting from the agricultural use back to the forest is greater than that being converted into primary forest to agriculture. Zoom cultivation in India is displayed in figure 5. Figure 6 shows the slash and burn technique in Indonesia. Now let's summarize the module. So far we have understood that for centuries indigenous and traditional communities throughout the tropics have used shifting cultivation for generation as part of the life-giving sustained forest agriculture system. It is proved that shifting cultivation is often the only way in which the nutrient-poor rainforest soil can be support the crops. It is one of the traditional agricultural system in which the plots of lands are cultivated temporarily, then abandoned and allowed to revert to their natural vegetation while the cultivators moves to the other plot. It is practiced throughout the tropical and subtropical regions of the world. In China, the practice has become a subject of debate for many scholars from within and outside the country. There is a counter argument stating that shifting cultivation is mainly affecting the environment and also disturbs the ecology. In India, the practice is still followed mostly by the tribal communities, as some suggest that it has some negative effect. Many scholars have showed their interest to study the problems related to such matter. Notwithstanding the positive effect of the shifting cultivation at the level of the government and international financial institutions, management of the forest in a sustainable way through the shifting cultivation has yet to be recognized as an environmental beneficial form of economic activity. Thank you.